You've been lied to about silence. Society teaches you that silence in a relationship means disinterest, that when someone pulls away, they're done. But that's not true. Not when you're dealing with someone with an avoidant attachment style, because here's what most people don't realize. For an avoidant, silence isn't rejection. It's their love language in disguise. And if you misinterpret it, you'll walk away from someone who's actually more emotionally overwhelmed by you than you could ever imagine. Avoidants don't love like the movies. They don't rush in with passionate confessions or open arms. They love from a distance, quietly, internally, often painfully. Their silence is not a wall to keep you out. It's a shelter they retreat to when their emotions become too loud for them to process in real time. And this is where most people get it wrong. They assume the quiet means, I don't care. But for the avoidants, silence actually means, I care so much I don't know how to deal with it. Think about this. When someone is afraid of fire, they don't run toward it. They step back. But the fire is still real. It's still burning. That's what love feels like for an avoidant. It burns too close to the core. It threatens their emotional independence. So they retreat, not because you mean nothing, but because you might mean too much. Most people are wired to seek connection when they fall in love. Avoidants are wired to seek space. Not because they want to disconnect, but because connection activates fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being hurt, fear of needing someone so much that losing them would destroy them. So when you feel hurt by their silence, remember, they're not punishing you. They're protecting themselves from the very thing they crave. You see, most avoidants grew up in environments where love felt conditional, where vulnerability was punished or ignored, so they developed emotional self-sufficiency as survival. Now, as adults, they mistake intimacy for danger. They learned, if I get too close, I'll lose myself, or worse, I'll be abandoned. So their silence isn't a lack of love. It's a defense mechanism against their own capacity for love. Here's where the psychology deepens. For the avoidant, love often triggers trauma. The closer they get to someone, the more their subconscious screams, you're not safe. So silence becomes the strategy. Space becomes the medication. They pull away not to hurt you, but to calm the emotional chaos they can't yet put into words. Now let's get philosophical for a second. In Plato's Symposium, love is described not as something soft, but as something that disturbs, that rattles the soul and exposes all our hidden longings. Avoidants feel that disturbance more than most. And instead of leaning in, they back off, hoping the storm passes without wrecking the ship. But you, the person on the other end, only see the distance. You don't see the storm. You don't feel the fear, so you assume silence equals absence. But in the world of avoidance, silence equals survival. And the paradox? The more they love, the quieter they become. So when an avoidant goes silent, don't rush to fill the gap. Don't assume it's over. Observe. Wait. Give them space to navigate their internal world. Because if you react with pressure, with panic, with pursuit, you reinforce their belief that love is dangerous, that closeness leads to chaos, and they'll run even farther. I'm not saying you should tolerate neglect, but I am saying learn the difference between absence and avoidance. Learn the difference between someone who doesn't care and someone who's terrified of how deeply they actually do. Because if you misread their silence, you might walk away from someone who's feeling something so real, it scares the hell out of them. This doesn't mean you chase, it means you understand. You stand firm in your self-worth, but you don't mislabel their fear as failure. You stay centered. You give them space, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to let them process love on their terms, not yours. And here's what usually happens. When an avoidant realizes you didn't punish them for pulling away, when they see that you didn't make their silence mean rejection, something begins to shift. Their fear melts, their defenses drop, and for the first time, they begin to feel safe enough to step forward instead of retreating. But it starts with you refusing to misinterpret their silence. Silence isn't the enemy. Misunderstanding it is. Sometimes the loudest I love you comes in the quietest moments. You ever wonder why someone who supposedly doesn't care still keeps showing up in subtle ways? Watching your stories, liking an old post, asking mutual friends about you. It's easy to dismiss these actions as meaningless, just digital habits. But when it comes to avoidance, these subtle behaviors often scream what their mouth will never say. I still care. I still feel. I'm still here. I just don't know how to show it directly. See, avoidants don't pursue in the traditional sense. They rarely initiate heartfelt conversations. They won't blow up your phone with I miss you texts. But that doesn't mean they've detached. In fact, their detachment is often just the surface layer of a much deeper emotional obsession, one they're constantly managing and masking through indirect behaviors. And this is what most people miss. They look for the obvious signs of love, communication, affection, words. But avoidants operate on a different plane. For them, love is something that threatens their emotional control. So rather than reach out and risk vulnerability, they monitor from afar. They observe. They stay close without being seen close. Because for them, the act of watching you from the shadows is safer than standing in the light of emotional exposure. Psychologically, this makes perfect sense. Avoidants often develop in childhood environments where their emotional needs weren't consistently met or were even punished. So over time, they equated closeness with danger, intimacy with loss of self. Now, as adults, when they actually feel something intense for someone, that old programming kicks in. They don't know how to do closeness, but they still feel the pull, the desire, the longing. And so what do? They watch, they hover, they track you from a distance because it gives them the illusion of connection without the cost of vulnerability. This is why social media becomes a playground for avoidance. It gives them access without obligation, proximity without participation. They can see you, feel something, even stay emotionally invested, all while avoiding the terrifying risk of actually showing up. It's emotional voyeurism. But make no mistake, it's not apathy. It's control, it's emotional management, and most of all, it's fear. But here's the twist most people never think about. If they didn't care, they wouldn't need to monitor you at all. Detachment doesn't look like checking your online status at 2 a.m. It doesn't look like showing up in the same places you go. It doesn't look like keeping your number, your photos, your playlists. True indifference is clean, cold, final. What avoidants do isn't indifference, it's suppressed attachment. It's love trying to survive without direct expression. And this is where the philosophical depth kicks in. In the phenomenology of spirit, Hegel speaks of the recognition of the other, that we define ourselves not just through being, but through being seen by the one we love. Avoidants want that recognition desperately, but they're afraid of what being seen truly means. So instead of asking for it, they settle for observing it from a distance. It's a tragic compromise to love in silence rather than risk being loved out loud. But let's not romanticize this too much. You're not a character in someone's secret love story. If they can't step forward, you're not obligated to sit in limbo, but you can recognize what's happening without taking it personally. You can see that their distant behavior is not always about you. It's about their emotional history, their wiring, their wounds. So the next time you notice that avoidant X watching your story or sending some subtle signal through a mutual friend, don't confuse it with a healthy bid for reconnection. But also don't dismiss it as nothing. It means something. It's emotion wrapped in fear. It's attachment playing out in a way that keeps them safe and you confused. You don't have to chase them. You don't have to decode every action, but you should understand what's actually going on beneath the surface, because that understanding, that clarity, gives you power, the power to respond instead of react, to lead instead of beg, to hold your ground while they try to find theirs. Avoidants won't always tell you they miss you, but they'll make sure they never fully lose sight of you. And if you're not careful, you'll interpret their silence as forgetfulness, when in truth, it's fixation. So here's what I want you to remember. Just because they're quiet doesn't mean they've let go. And just because they're distant doesn't mean they don't feel. Sometimes the one who watches you from afar is the one who's struggling hardest to come close. When an avoidant starts acting cold, emotionally distant, indifferent, or even a little harsh, most people interpret it as a lack of care. They think, if he loved me, he wouldn't treat me like this. But that assumption, though logical on the surface, completely misses the truth of what's happening underneath. Because what feels like coldness is often not emotional absence, but emotional overload. Avoidants don't go numb because they feel nothing. They go numb because they feel too much, and they don't know how to metabolize it. Coldness, to them, is a form of armor. It's a psychological shield they've learned to wear over the years, not to hurt you, but to protect themselves from vulnerability. See, love, real, raw, emotionally intense love, is dangerous to someone who was never taught how to sit with that kind of intimacy. So when you start getting closer, when you become emotionally significant, that's when they begin to retreat. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're getting too close to their unhealed wound. And unlike securely attached people who move toward the ones they love, avoidants are wired to pull back when things get emotionally real. It's not that they don't care, it's that caring terrifies them. And instead of showing warmth, they default to cool detachment. That coldness, it's not rejection, it's containment. It's an attempt to keep their emotions boxed in, to stop the fire from spreading. But here's what's tragic. The more they feel, the colder they seem. The deeper the connection, the more rigid the emotional walls become. And so from the outside, it looks like indifference, when in reality, it's emotional paralysis. Let's go deeper. Emotionally avoidant individuals were often trained through childhood experiences or painful relationships to associate closeness with pain. To them, opening up equals losing control. Vulnerability equals danger. And so love becomes a battlefield. And their armor, that distant, icy behavior, it's not malicious, it's survival. Now here's where the psychology gets really fascinating. In neuroscience, we talk about the window of tolerance, the zone where a person can function emotionally without shutting down or exploding. For avoidants, love often pushes them outside that window. Their nervous system perceives emotional intimacy as a threat. And instead of fighting or fleeing, they freeze, they shut down, they give you a blank stare, a cold shoulder, or a sudden drop-off in communication. Not because they want to hurt you, but because they don't know how to stay emotionally present in the storm of connection. But here's what I want you to hear loud and clear. That freeze response doesn't mean they feel nothing. In fact, it often means they feel everything and have no idea how to handle it. Imagine a dam about to burst. Too much pressure too fast, and the whole structure collapses. So what do? They reinforce the walls. They pull away. They act uninterested. They tell themselves stories like, I don't need anyone. I'm better off alone. Not because they truly believe that, but because belief becomes the anesthesia for feelings that hurt too much to face. And philosophically, we have to understand this too. The human condition isn't just about what we feel, it's about what we permit ourselves to feel. And avoidants, they don't permit much. They suppress, they edit, They censor their emotional reality so heavily that what reaches the surface is a fraction of what's really going on. They aren't cold, they're fragmented. But here's the danger. If you take their coldness at face value, you'll harden your heart in response. You'll match their detachment with your own. And just like that, two people who actually care drift apart. Because one was too scared to show it, and the other too wounded to wait. And that's why understanding this is so important. You don't have to excuse unhealthy behavior, but you must understand the source. Because awareness gives you the power to respond, not react. To recognize, this isn't rejection. This is a defense mechanism. And from that place, you get to choose. Do I stand firm in my boundaries while holding compassion, or do I internalize their behavior and shrink my own sense of worth? The avoidance coldness isn't about you, it's about their unhealed fear of emotional exposure, their inability to tolerate the intensity of love. And ironically, the more they love, the more dangerous it feels. So next time you face that freeze, the shutdown, the distance, the emotional chill, don't just ask, why are they pulling away? Ask, what emotion are they running from that they're too scared to show? Because sometimes the coldest behavior is coming from the warmest heart that never learned how to stay open without breaking. And if you can see through the ice, you might just witness the fire they've spent their whole life trying to hide. Here's what most people don't realize. When an avoidant pulls back, it's not always a retreat. It's often a recalibration. It's not a goodbye. It's not the end. It's a process, a highly emotional, deeply internal process. One that's often misread as disinterest or detachment. But at its core, it's fear wrapped around vulnerability. See, for the avoidant, emotional closeness isn't just intimacy, it's exposure. It threatens their carefully constructed world of self-reliance. And so when they start to feel something real, when you begin to mean more than they expected, their nervous system hits the brakes. That pullback you experience, that vanishing act, that silence, it's not a declaration that they don't care. It's a signal that they're emotionally overwhelmed and need to process what they're feeling. Now, unlike secure people, avoidants don't process emotions with others. They process away from them. Because depending on someone else to navigate emotional waves feels unsafe to them. They didn't grow up learning that closeness brings safety. They learned that closeness brings pressure, criticism, rejection, or even abandonment. So when they feel the stirrings of attachment, their internal wiring fires a warning, this isn't safe, get distance, now. And so they back off. They withdraw not because they've lost interest, but because they've lost emotional control. Think about that for a moment. They feel so much that they need to step back to regulate, not because you're wrong for showing up with openness and depth, but because they're not yet equipped to meet you there without shutting down. This is where miscommunication destroys potential. Most people interpret that pause, that quiet phase, as evidence that they never mattered. But the truth is often the opposite. The avoidant pulls back because you hit a nerve. You touched something real. You sparked a depth they weren't ready to confront. And now their subconscious is screaming, don't fall, don't feel, don't get pulled under. So they retreat into work, into distractions, into isolation, into a version of themselves that seems indifferent, but beneath that performance is a storm, an internal war between the part of them that wants connection and the part that believes connection will destroy their freedom, or worse, expose their wounds. It's critical to understand that avoidants are not emotionless. In fact, they often feel more intensely than they show, and that intensity is what scares them. Their emotional system isn't underdeveloped, it's overprotected. They've locked away their vulnerability behind years of self-protection, and when love starts cracking that armor, panic sets in. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't trust they can survive it. And if you respond to that pullback with pressure, with chasing, with over-explaining, you only confirm their fear, that intimacy equals suffocation, that love means losing autonomy. So they run further. Not because of you, but because of their belief system, one built from experience, trauma, and a lifetime of reinforced distance. But when you don't chase, when you allow the pause, when you hold your ground instead of collapsing into emotional pursuit, you do something powerful. You disrupt their pattern. You show them that love can exist without pressure, that closeness can coexist with freedom. And in that space, many avoidants begin to do something they've rarely done in their lives, reflect instead of react. That's when the shift happens. That's when slowly they start stepping forward again, not because you demanded it, but because they chose it, because they had the room to sit with what they feel, to face the discomfort, and to realize that pulling back didn't make the feelings disappear, it just magnified them. And that's the paradox. For avoidance, space doesn't dilute their emotions, it often amplifies them. The longer they're away, the louder the emotions get. Because what they tried to avoid stays with them in silence, and when the world goes quiet, the truth speaks. And it often sounds like your name. So the next time an avoidant pulls away, don't panic. Don't assume the story is over. Recognize the pattern for what it is. Not rejection, but emotional recalibration. A moment where their system is trying to make sense of feelings that don't fit inside their usual framework of control. That doesn't mean you wait forever. It doesn't mean you shrink yourself, but it does mean you stop taking their pause personally. You see it for what it is, a man or woman sitting in the discomfort of vulnerability and trying to figure out if it's safe to come back. Sometimes the pullback isn't a door closing, it's the space being created for something real to walk through. Let me tell you something counterintuitive, something that'll flip your assumptions on their head. The longer an avoidant stays away, the deeper their emotional paralysis. Most people think that time and distance equal detachment, that silence means it's over. But when it comes to avoidance, that's rarely the case. Their avoidance isn't evidence of emotional emptiness, it's evidence of emotional overwhelm. The longer the silence, the heavier the weight of everything they've been avoiding. See, when you're dealing with a secure person, time apart is often a reflection of clarity. They all take a step back, process, and come to a conclusion. But avoidants aren't processing clarity, they're avoiding impact. They're not distancing to decide if they care, they're distancing because they already do, and that care terrifies them. So they run. And the longer they're gone, the more stuck they become. Emotionally, mentally, even spiritually. Because that space doesn't calm their feelings, it intensifies them. The longer they suppress, the louder the subconscious becomes. Thoughts they don't want to think, memories they can't shake, questions they try to outrun, and the most haunting one of all, why can't I stop thinking about her? Remember this, avoidants aren't in denial because they feel nothing. They're in denial because they feel everything and have no tools to regulate it. Their defense mechanism is not absence of emotion, it's emotional suppression. It's detachment as a form of control. It's pretending they've moved on when every quiet moment screams otherwise. This is where most people misunderstand the behavior. They think if he hasn't reached out in weeks, clearly he's over it. But that conclusion assumes an emotionally direct person. Avoidants aren't emotionally direct. They're emotionally delayed. You're measuring their silence by your timeline, your logic, your capacity to connect. But their silence isn't on your timeline. It's the manifestation of their fear, not their finality. Let's go deeper. Philosophically, Kierkegaard said that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, the unbearable weight of potential. Avoidants live in that dizziness. Love opens the door to something profound. And that profundity sends them spiraling. So when they pull away, they're not just trying to escape you, they're trying to escape the part of themselves that wants to surrender, the part of them that's been buried beneath years of self-preservation. And when they go silent for long periods of time, what they're actually doing is wrestling with their own reflection, fighting the emotional truths they don't want to admit. I miss her. I need her. I'm not fine without her. But here's what's brutal. They won't show it. You won't see it in texts or calls. You won't see it on social media. They won't give you that closure, that validation, that emotional breadcrumb. Not because you don't deserve it, but because they don't know how to offer it without tearing open the wound they've worked so hard to seal. So instead, they suffer in silence. They isolate, they numb, they bury themselves in distractions, hoping time will erase what emotion insists on remembering. And this is the paradox. The longer they're silent, the more they're consumed. They don't miss you less with time, they feel you more. But because avoidants lack the internal structure to face what they feel, they stay stuck, emotionally paralyzed, caught between the truth they feel and the story they've convinced themselves of, I'm better off alone. So what does this mean for you? It means that silence doesn't equal healing. It means that distance doesn't always mean disinterest. And most of all, it means that someone can love you deeply and still be completely incapable of facing that love without breaking down. That's not a reflection of your worth, it's a reflection of their wiring. Now let me be clear, this isn't an invitation to wait endlessly or excuse emotional immaturity. But it is a call to understand the dynamic so you can stop taking it personally. Because when you internalize their avoidance, you shrink your light. You doubt your impact. You start believing a false story. If they loved me, they wouldn't be gone this long. But the real story is this. They've been gone this long because the love they feel has no room to breathe inside the prison of their fear. So instead of chasing, stand still. Instead of doubting your value, own it more fiercely. Because real love, the kind that challenges someone to grow, doesn't fade with silence. It confronts them, it lingers, it echoes. And sometimes that echo becomes the very thing they can't outrun. Sometimes the silence isn't proof they forgot you, it's proof they can't. Here's a deeply misunderstood behavior that avoidants exhibit, one that causes a lot of confusion, especially when someone is trying to understand how they truly feel. They resist needing you. They won't call when they're hurting. They won't confess they miss you. They won't chase you the way movies and fairy tales taught us people in love are supposed to. And so you start to assume if he's not reaching out, he doesn't care. If he's not trying to fix this, I must not matter. But let me break this down. Avoidants don't resist love, they resist need. And in their psychology, needing someone feels like weakness. It feels like losing control. They equate dependency with vulnerability and vulnerability with danger. So when they start catching feelings, their first instinct isn't to lean in, it's to pull back. Not because the love isn't real, but because real love demands a surrender they were never taught how to give. Think about that. The moment you become emotionally significant to an avoidant, they feel a part of themselves slipping, a piece of their identity. It's been built around not needing anyone to be okay. So instead of saying, I miss you, they go silent. Instead of saying, I need you, they double down on independence. And you're left there wondering, how can someone feel something and do the exact opposite of what love should look like? It's because for them, showing need feels like exposure. And they've spent most of their lives learning that emotional exposure leads to pain, rejection, criticism, abandonment. So they become masters at suppressing the very feelings that would bring them closer to you. They turn emotional intimacy into a battlefield. They fight the feeling instead of surrendering to it. Here's the core truth. For avoidance, the more they care, the more dangerous you become. Not because you are dangerous, but because their need for you threatens the fragile balance they've created inside. They want love, but they want it on terms that don't require vulnerability. They want closeness without dependence, connection without exposure. But here's the problem. Love doesn't work that way. Love requires need, not codependence, not emotional collapse, but the kind of authentic need that says, you matter to me. I feel safer when you're here. Life is richer because of your presence. And that kind of openness, that kind of soft, exposed truth, it short circuits the avoidance emotional system. So they respond with distance. Not because they've stopped caring, but because they care too much and have no healthy model for what to do with that level of emotional energy. And that's where the paradox sets in. The avoidant who loves you the most will often act like they need you the least. But underneath that emotional self-sufficiency is someone terrified of losing control. Now let's go even deeper. Philosophically, Erich Fromm once said that immature love says, I love you because I need you, but mature love says, I need you because I love you. That's the kind of maturity avoidants are afraid to touch. Because to need you because they love you, to allow themselves to feel that soft interdependence, would mean dismantling the walls that have kept them emotionally safe their entire lives. It would mean rewriting their identity from someone who survives alone to someone who thrives in connection. And that shift doesn't happen overnight. That shift requires discomfort. It requires confronting years of beliefs that told them needing anyone is weakness. So here's what you need to understand. When they go silent, when they resist contact, when they choose isolation over reconnection, it doesn't always mean they've moved on. It might mean they're at war with themselves, torn between the desire to love and the fear of becoming emotionally dependent. And if you take their distance personally, you fall into the trap of thinking you were never enough. But their behavior isn't about your worth, it's about their internal war with love itself. So don't mistake the absence of pursuit for the absence of feeling. And don't confuse emotional restraint with emotional vacancy. You're not dealing with someone who doesn't care. You're dealing with someone who was never taught how to care openly. Their love is hidden behind walls of fear.